blessing?
Okay.
Batya Palmer in the room is going to recite the Torah blessing.
Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen, amen. Blessed are you, source of all life, who has given us Torah and instructed us to soak in your divine wisdom. Okay, so this morning, oh my God, we're starting all over again, right? It's the same story. Amazing, but new every year, right? New every time. Why? Because we're in a different position and the world's in a different position.
Jewish Groundhog Day.
Place. What was that?
Jewish Groundhog Day.
Jewish Groundhog Day, exactly. The same thing again and again. So what I'd like to do this morning is a little ambitious, and I'm sure it's too ambitious, so I'm going to have to sort of edit my plan as we go along, is look at why there are two creation stories and dive into each briefly and invite you to consider that question with me. And today I want to invite comments, but really targeted, focused, short comments. And on that question, okay? So hopefully I'll be clear on the task at every step of the way. I'm going to share my screen. Here. No. Oh, here it is. It's hiding. Okay. God. Okay. This screen sharing is always a little bit mysterious. So what occurred to me, so I have a thesis. And the thesis is based on a rabbinic comment. We're going to look at the rabbinic comment. There are all kinds of explanations of why there are two creation stories. And in the 1800s, someone named Wellhausen sort of invented the field of Wissenschaft, which is a scientific study of the Bible. And he posited that there were multiple authors who wrote the Bible. So it's called the documentary hypothesis. And the different authors that he posited were J, E, P, and D. So the Yahwist, the Elohist, the priestly, and the Deuteronomic. So the Yahwist, so part of this, or part of his hypothesis, or maybe his hypothesis is actually largely based on the fact that he noticed that different names of God frequented different parts of the Torah. Now, I have to say, I am not, even though I went to the Jewish Theological Seminary and they kind of specialize in this thing called Wissenschaft, I am not an expert in any way. And I never really liked it. I resisted it. And I think you'll see why I resisted it. So if I'm saying anything that's wrong, or anyone wants to supplement this thought, please drop something in the chat. So Yahwist is based on the narratives or the pieces of the Torah that include the divine name Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, Elohist, Elohim, priestly, like the Leviticus and other priestly documents like the first creation story, and finally the Deuteronomist, which describes Deuteronomy, the last book of the Torah, as well as other pieces of the Torah. Okay, so he said why are there two creation stories? Because there are two authors, right? There's the priestly, which describes the first story of creation in Genesis 1. And then there's the Elohist, which describes the second story of creation. So now what do I mean when I say two creation stories? So the first creation story is God created the heavens and the earth was unformed and void. And then there are 6 days of creation and the Sabbath. The second story of creation it contains the human drama, right? There's no human drama in the first story of creation. So the second story of creation is set in the garden. And that's where God, there's a different account of creating Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. And that's where God commands Adam and Chava, or first Adam, not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Okay, so we're going to dive into each of these accounts, and then we're going to ask why are there different accounts? And here's my theory about that. Let me just look in the chat and see if my hypothesis isn't generally accepted. Okay, good to know. Do you mean the whole Wissenschaft school is not accepted, or simply Wellhausen? And so it's become more complicated over time. Now there are different, the idea is there are different schools of writers. And then there's a grand redactor, or there are multiple redactors that bring these stories together, right? So it ends up sort of redactors that literally weave these stories together. So even if you use Wissenschaft in order to understand the Torah, you still have to ask, why did these stories come together? Why was this story included? Why was this piece included? Right? That's where I don't like it is we're saying, this contradicts with that. Oh, there must have been two authors. It's not enough for me. I want more meaning than that. Now, I don't want to say, and my experience is now that the Torah is like a hodgepodge of different, pieces of literature that just haphazardly come together. So my whole enterprise is to make meaning of this, right? And that's what basically Torah is. Okay, so, all right, I don't see any other pieces of information that I should be sort of including right at this moment. So, in the Talmud, Megillah 13b, in source 2, it says, Ta'amar Reish Lakish, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Makeh Yisrael Ela Im Ken Boreh Lahem Refu'at Chila. Reish Lakish says that the Holy One, blessed be they, does not strike at the Jewish people, does not wound, Makeh, the Jewish people, unless God already has created a remedy for them beforehand. As it is stated, when I would have healed Israel, then the iniquity of Ephraim was uncovered. So in other words, the healing precedes the wound, right? Which I think is such a fascinating idea. Now, the rest of it, I actually thought I edited it, but it's still here. So I'll share it with you. Aval, umot haolam eno kan. Everyone else except for the Jews, it's not like that. Makeh otan, first God wounds them, v'achar kach boreh lahem refuah shneamar, and after God invents for them a remedy, or creates for them a remedy, shneamar v'nagaf Hashem et Mitzrayim nagof v'rafo. So God plagued Egypt, plagued them, and then healed. Smiting and healing. So first let me just address this second half, which I know is very disturbing. There's an idea amongst the rabbis that the way God relates to the rest of the nations is more according to the natural order of things. But there's something about God's relationship to Israel that reverses the natural order of things. So the remedy is created before the wound, the healing before the wound. So why then am I bringing this to you now? Because my idea, as I was thinking about the two creation stories, is that the first creation story is the healing for the wound of the second creation story. So what's the wound of the second creation story? So much, and we'll go into it. Alienation, division, hiding from God, shame, blame, punishment, power relationships, so much wound, right? So let's look at the first creation story. And again, obviously this is just my idea about why these two creation stories are here. There are lots of other reasons that people are positing. You don't have to go along with it, but let's see how it might work. Okay, everybody on board? Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, all right. All right, so next piece. So let's look at the beginning of the creation of the world, which I think I just so love this piece. It's so powerful. So Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, when God began to create heaven and earth. So the Torah begins with telling us how God created. And then in verse 2, the Torah is telling us, here's what it looked like before God started creating. So this is not creation ex nihilo, right? That's not the Torah's account. In fact, it says that there were several elements that existed before God started creating. So what were they? Ha'aretz hayta tohu va'bohu v'choshech al pnei tehom v'ruach Elohim mirachepet al pnei hamayim. Gotcha. One second, let me just translate this. So the earth was unformed and void, tohu va'bohu, or you could say chaos, or null and void, or topsy-turvy. It's, tohu and vohu rhyme with each other. So like that chaotic, unformed sort of sense of things.
Well, there's no chaos in a rhyme.
There's no chaos in Iran?
In a rhyme.
Oh, in a rhyme. Oh, nice. I'm thinking, okay. No chaos in a rhyme. Beautiful. So maybe that's the beginning of, naming it that way is the beginning of form. Love that.
Right.
So there's earth, there's chaos, there's darkness, there's the breath of God, and there's water. Okay, question?
No, I'm sorry, just a remark.
Yeah.
A Kabbalistic approach also exists. I'm studying Zohar with Daniel.
Great.
And we follow the Torah, and what the wise men have to say are based on Kabbalistic ideas.
Great. Did you want to say something specific about the two creation stories?
No.
Okay. Okay, so think about those elements. Darkness, wind, or breath, and water. So when I think of those things, I think of a womb, right? So there's perhaps a birth narrative here that's submerged.
Ooh.
Perhaps, a remnant of mythological or more overtly mythological tales of creation. And in fact, if we look at Job describes creation using the word womb. So if we look at Job for a second in source 4, who closed the sea behind doors when it gushed forth out of the womb. Right, beautiful, beautiful poetry. And there's also darkness here. Besuni anan busho v'arafel chatulato. When I clothed it in clouds, swaddled it in dense clouds. So arafel is dense clouds, but it often denotes darkness as well. Okay, and then there's a sense, if you look at the rest of this little piece from Job, when I made my breakers my limit for it. So the sea always wants to break forth, but God, creates this distinction, this separation between heavens and earth, and also sea and dry land, and sort of, trying to keep things apart. But there's one notion, and if you look carefully at the Torah, we'll see that chaos always wants to break forth, and form's always kind of warring with chaos, right? So the boundaries always have to be established, right? And so God said to the sea, you may come so far and no further. Here your surging waves will stop. Okay, I see it more as a statement than a question, but there's a question right now. Okay, let's go on with the beginning of creation, verse 3. So here's how God starts to create. Now we're back to source 3. Vayomer Elohim yihi or vayihi or. So God says, let there be light. And the universe, so there's this kind of call and response. And the universe mirrors or matches God perfectly by Yihi or. Right? Let there be light, and there was light. Vayar Elohim et ha'or ki tov, and God saw that the light was good. So that's really interesting, because what we see in it is that God didn't know exactly how the light would manifest, at least this portrayal of God. But here, God sees that it was good. right? It's like you make something, you don't quite know what it's going to be because you don't have total control of the process.
Like trial and error.
Trial and error, right? And in fact, God is portrayed in the Midrash as a being who created drafts and then destroyed them and then recreated. And this is actually, the Torah begins with one of the drafts, right? And you see that force and God throughout the Torah is like, this is not working so well. I want to destroy it, right? Like in Noah or with Moshe. And then Moses says, no, God, don't destroy. But God keeps wanting to destroy and start again, right? That's a force that's there. Destroy your draft. It's not good enough. But here, Vayar Kitov, it's good enough. It's good enough. Or it's more than good enough. Vayavdel Elohim ben ha'or ben ha'choshev. So God separates between the light and the darkness, and that's one of the processes, a central function of creation is to separate and distinguish and differentiate. And now here's the naming. Vayikra Elohim ha'or yom v'la'choshech kara laila. And God calls the light day, and God calls the night, and calls the darkness night. The erev vayibokar yom echad, and there was erev, there was evening and morning one day. So the other thing that's put into motion here is rhythm, right? There's this, right? It's like create, day one, create, day two, create, day three, and time, right? Time is being created. Okay, let me just see if I'm missing anything in the chat here.
Just one.
Yeah, Jeremy.
Just one observation.
Yeah,
God is doing more than calling.
a little loud.
God is doing more than calling and naming. He's giving permanency
Nice.
to these things.
Nice. There's sustainability, viability. Okay. Now look at this. So structurally, if we look at other stories in the Torah, right, the same elements appear in a different kind of coming together, but still with the force of birth. So with the Israelites coming out of Egypt, right, they're standing between the Red Sea and the Egyptians. And okay, let's just read this. And it came between the army of the Egyptians and the army of Israel, meaning the cloud of God. Thus there was the cloud with the darkness, and it cast a spell upon the night, so that the one could not come near the other all through the night. So Israel and Egypt, and the Israelites and the Egyptians could not come near each other. Vayet Moshe et yado al hayam, and Moshe raised his arm on the sea. Vayolech Adonai et hayam beruach kadim azah kol halayla, vayasem et hayam lacharata, v'yibak'u hamayim. So 21, then Moses held out his arm over the sea, and Adonai drove back the sea with a strong east wind all that night and turned the sea into dry land. The waters were split. So you hear how that echoes creation, right? Water, dry land, separation, and now we have the birth of the Israelites going through. Vayavo b'nei Israel b'toch hayam v'yavasha. And the Israelites went into the sea on dry ground. V'hamayim lahem choma minam u'mismolam. And the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. And if that's not a birth story, I don't know what it is. Right? So we've got the darkness, we've got the winds, we've got also the aris, the dry land. And we certainly have the water, and then we have word with Sinai. God spoke Moses would say. Okay, so now let's look, I think this is the last piece of the first creation story that we want to look at. And for those of you who came in late, we're doing a comparison of the first creation story, or at least parts of the first creation story and the second creation story, and trying to figure out why there are two creation stories. So here's the creation of human beings in God's image. And God said, let us make humankind in our image after our likeness. So there's a famous issue here of why is God speaking in the plural, And the traditional answer, and Rashi quotes this, is that God is speaking to God's angelic hosts or heavenly retinue. Another possibility is God is addressing the creation that God is in the process of making. God is partnering with creation. Okay. Vayirdu bidgat hayam uba'ot hashamayim uba'behema uba'kol ha'aretz kol ha'remes ha'remes al-haaretz. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth. Vayivra. Now it's interesting. Vayivra, creating as opposed to vayas, making, is used only for the animals and for human beings. Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam b'tzalmo. And now we're in the sixth day, by the way. So God created humankind in the divine image, b'tzalmo, b'tzelem Elohim bara'oto, creating it in the image of God, right? So there's the sentence is sort of rearranged several times, kind of reversed. Bara'oto, zachar, I'm sorry, Adam b'tzalmo, b'tzelem Elohim bara'oto, in the image of God, God created it. Zachar u'nekeva bara'otam, male and female, God created them. So gender here appears simultaneously, right, with no difference in distinction in value or time, right? So that's really interesting. And both genders, because here it's polarity of gender, are created in the image of God. Vayivarech otam Elohim, vayomer lahem Elohim, peru uruvu umil'u et haaretz v'kivshuha, u'du b'dgat hayam u'ba'och hashamayim u'chol chaya haromeset al haaretz. So God blessed them, and God said to him, be fertile, increase, fill the earth, and master it, rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth. Okay, so that's basically creation one. There are 6 days of creation. There's that rhythm, different aspects and creatures of the universe are created successively, and then there's God resting on the seventh day. But the institution of the Shabbat in Genesis is not a social institution. It's God resting. It has nothing to do with human beings, right? Yet that doesn't happen until Exodus, where it becomes a gift for the Israelites, right? Once they've left Egypt, right? It's the antidote to slavery. Talking about the remedy or the healing being created before the womb. So Shabbat is created before slavery, and then reframed as a social institution. Okay, so now creation 2. Same elements, whole different story. So, creation 2 is the human-centered story, right? You could say that creation 1 is the world-centered story, the majestic tale of the creation of the universe. And creation 2 is like, the struggles of human beings, nakedness, sexuality, death, mortality, work, birth, all those things that are difficult in a human life. Ela Toldot. I just want to see, are there any hands? I don't think so. Am I missing any hands? Not that I know. Ari, let me know if there are. Alana, so good to see you.
I just had a comment that it's not exactly in the creation, but I was just thinking about the very first part of the creation of sort of, there was no form, and then there was the separation of darkness and light.
Yeah.
And like the movement over it. And I was thinking, and you're talking about it as a birth story, but it struck me last night when I was reading it as also like a story of adjustment to death or a depression or some other state that one kind of comes through where there is a formlessness. And then all of a sudden there's light again.
Beautiful, Alana. I love that. And what's the function of the breath in that process?
Yeah. I don't know, the breath comes back, or I just was thinking about like the absence, or kind of like the veil that falls when there's a death all of a sudden into this form. Like you have a sense of form and you have a sense of reality, and then with the death, it kind of like goes away.
Yeah.
And then there's this darkness, and maybe there is that wind that kind of comes and waves and wakes you up again. And then at some point you're back into a place where there is light and darkness, and there is that veil again, there is that separation.
Yeah, beautiful. I have a friend who's a psychoanalyst who wrote about Shiva as a holding container. So you can think about it as a holding container or a kind of womb. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Alana. Okay, Daniel. Good to see you, Daniel.
It's kind of disappointing to me.
Wait, hold on one second. I just call her Daniel and then Batya.
No,
Good morning, good Shabbos.
Yeah.
I'm still dwelling a little bit on that remarkable moment of let us make
Yeah.
humankind in our image.
Yeah.
And what's so interesting in this first creation story is that there's no mention of Yud He Vav He in the first
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, I sort of experience Yud He Vav He as kind of being in the wings. And Elohim is referring to this us and revealing a kind of paradox that Elohim is the divine being expressed in multiplicity. All of these forms are being created, but there's Yud He Vav He in the background, which is the wholeness, the oneness. So it's out of the oneness is the many, but the many and the one are unified. So the creation stories to me are going to probably be about the same single theme, just from two different perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Radically different perspectives, but yes, for sure. All right. Batya, you had a quick comment?
tiny
Yeah.
comment again. It's kind of disappointing to me that God is created, and we're created in God's image, but the image is, I mean, I don't like what we are now, you know, so that.
Yeah, we're going to get into that in the second creation story.
Oh, okay.
So Batya's disappointed in humanity, right? Along with many of us, like, oh my God, we're creating a divine image.
Like a
And
father,
look who we've
a
become.
bad father or a good father.
Yeah. Okay, got it. All right, Marilyn, Alana, and then Tomas, and then I'm going to invite everybody to be concise so we can get into the second creation story.
Hi,
Hi,
Shabbat
Marilyn.
Shalom.
Good to see you.
Yes, a new thought that I had this year is about, we come to the part, well, God is creating Adam in our own image. Well, I was thinking in order to create, the creator needs to make choices and separations. You cannot have creation, like sort of following on what was said, if everything is one, there is no creation. There's just one. In order to create anything, you have to separate. And even the example you gave about Exodus, it's interesting. There's separation. God is doing a lot of separation there. And that we are in God's image because we can also make choices. And the first choice was, of course, the tree. And let's see how you're going to choose. But that idea of creator as one that has to make choices and make separations is interesting.
Yeah, and that actually lays the groundwork for pain and disconnection and the possibility of reunification. Okay, Alana.
Shabbat Shalom.
This is going to be after Alana, Tomas, and then I'm going to go back to the text. Okay.
So my comment, I feel like, flows from Batya's sentiment as well.
The disappointment.
Yeah, and I just want to go back to your brilliant framing of the first versus the second creation story, as the first being a kind of healing for the second. And so I'm considering the possibility that one aspect of the healing is that humans are decentered in the first creation story.
Yes. Yes.
So,
sorry, Alana. You're anticipating where I'm going. But go ahead.
Okay.
No, it's okay. Go ahead. So yeah,
Yeah,
humans
and-
are decentered. It's a grand universe. It's the majesty,
Right, yes.
right, of the world.
Right, a grand, beautiful, complex
Yes.
universe that is greater than us, and we need that in this moment of climate destruction. You know, to really
Absolutely.
understand and live
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. You're saying it so beautifully. So yes, it's the decentering of human beings in the first creation story, and you'll see now how much we're centered on human beings and their drama and their shame and their blame and all that kind of stuff in the second creation story. Okay, Tomas.
Very concisely,
Yes.
in regard time. On the subject of disappointment, I think
Yeah.
the important word is image, creating an image of God, because an image is just a shadow, a reflection, a memory, an illustration. It's not the original. The photocopy starts to
I know
lose
it's not
information. So I think that word image is really interesting, and I'd be interested in its etymology of the original. And then secondly, on the
Wait,
point
can
on-
everyone hear Tomas online? Okay, good.
or am I audible?
You're
So,
good, yeah.
so anyway, I'm interested in the etymology,
Yeah,
like what is
yeah,
it in the Hebrew?
yeah.
But on the subject of multiplicity and singularity, like I can only sort of add to the mystery in a way because it reminds me of this other creation passage that has puzzled me since the age of 5 when I was forced to memorize it as part of my catechism, which is chapter 1, verse 1 of the Gospel of John, which is admittedly
beginning.
not one of the books of Moses, but in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
Yeah, it's so
It's
beautiful.
such a puzzle.
So beautiful, so beautiful, and so mysterious.
So mysterious because God is accompanied by the Word. The Word, in fact, precedes God somehow, at least in the grammar of a sentence.
And in the Midrash, it actually says that God consulted the Torah, consulted the Word in order to create the universe.
Oh, for real?
Yeah, so the Torah,
Now I
in
know
that
which Word it
case,
was.
almost preceded God.
Wow.
Yeah, we can look into that.
Okay, let's look into that.
Yeah, we can dig into that. Okay, all right, now let's look at the second creation story. I'm just thinking about which pieces we should actually focus on, given our time. Okay, so here I call this water, wind, and word because there are these rivers in Eden, right? And then there's, we're going to go to 7, and I'm going to ask Asher Chaim to read, and just, if you can, skim the first 6 beautiful verses to yourself. And Asher Chaim, do you want to read from verse 7? This is the garden human, Yud He Vav He construction of the creation of the world. And in it, there is really interesting dynamics between human beings and between God and human beings. And like Alana said, it gets really, the stage becomes much smaller. Okay, Asher Chaim, take it away.
When you said read it or sing it, that's for the first 6, right?
Verse 6, we're just skimming to ourselves. And verse 7, do it however you
Vayitzer,
want to do it. Oops. I stopped my share. I didn't mean to do that. Sorry. Okay, now, go ahead.
Vayitzer Adonai Elohim et ha'adam afar min ha'adama vayipach be'apav nishmat hayim vayhi ha'adam l'nefesh hayya. Yud He Vav He, the God fashioned earthling dust from the earth and breathed into its nostrils spirit of life, and earthling became a living spirit. Vayikra Adonai Elohim gan be'eden miqtedem vayasem sham et ha'adam asher yasar. Yud He Vav He, the God, planted a garden in Eden, place of moisture, eastwards, and placed there the earthling whom had created. Vayasmach Adonai Elohim min ha'adama kol eitz nehmad lemar'eh v'tov lema'achal v'eitz ha'chayim b'toch hagan v'eitz ha'da'at tov v'ra. Good Yud He Vav He, the God, caused to sprout from the earth.
Yeah, I lost my place here. One second. I see. Okay, go ahead.
all sorts of trees that were pleasant to look at and good for eats, plus the tree of life in the midst of the garden, and a tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Right, so this is really interesting because that particular polarity between good and evil does not emerge until the second creation story, right? The first creation story is Vayar ki tov, and God saw that it was good, and God saw that it was very good. Right now, here we have good and evil, which brings us back to, I think it was Marilyn's point about God with God's ability to choose, created a creature that could choose and is commanded to choose, so to speak. Okay, so now let's skip these beautiful rivers and go to the origin. Well, actually, this was the origin of Ra, right? Tov Ra. But let's look at more Ra in this passage. Genesis 2:15.
ויקח אדוני אלוהים את האדם ויניחהו בגן עדן לעובדה ולשומרה. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the God, took Earthling and placed Earthling in the garden of moisture to work it and to guard it. ויכתב אדוני אלוהים על האדם לאמור, מכל עץ הגן אכול תאכל. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the God commanded Earthling, saying, from all of the trees of the garden, es gesindheit, eat freely.
But notice, it's really complicated because this is the first command that God gives them here, right? Before the fact that they should not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, God commanded them, eat from whatever you want. It's a strange command, but it's a command.
And fruits, no grain, no beans, no, never mind.
Nuts.
ומעץ הדעת טוב ורע לא תאכל ממנו, כי ביום אכולך ממנו מות תמות. But from the tree of knowledge, awareness of good and evil, you shall not eat from it, because during the day that you eat from it, you are mortal. You will surely die. Vayomer Adonai Elohim, lo tov heyot ha'adam levado, e'eseh lo ezer kenegdo.
Okay, so look at, I'm sorry, you didn't translate that, go ahead.
Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the God said, not good that Earthling is alone. I shall make for Earthling a fitting counterpart.
Right, so this is the first time that lo tov is used, right? Not good, and until now, again, good, but not good to be alone. And I just saw some commentary about, like, maybe God is projecting, like maybe this is another way that God is trying to mirror God's existence on this earth, because God partnered with humanity. God didn't want to be alone, right? And that's why God created the world. And now God is saying to human beings, you shouldn't be alone. Like, how does God know that it's not good to be alone? So one perhaps can surmise that God experienced that God self. Okay, so now let's look at this. This is fascinating about Ra, and I never realized this. So here's, the various roots. Internally, the meanings of these clusters are convincingly aligned, and the most fundamental meaning of this cluster, obviously, never obvious to me, but now it is, has to do with compartmentalization or separation. That's fascinating. That Ra is about, and to echo what Dan was saying, like if God is about oneness in unity, then compartmentalization or separation or disconnection is not good, right? This could be a good thing when the emphasis lies on the getting together of two separate parts, hence the word of re'ah, meaning friend, but it's a bad thing when a fruitful unity is compromised, hence the word ra, meaning evil. Okay, so here's okay, so remember the elements that we started with, right? Earth and wind and water. So we saw, and also naming, because, or word, because Adam became a creature who named all the animals. What we didn't have in that constellation was darkness, and now we have darkness. So can you read this, Asher Chaim? Source 11.
ויפל אדוני אלוהים תרדמה על האדם וישן, ויקח אחת מצלעותיו ויסגור בשר תחתנה. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the God, caused to fall on Earthling a great anesthesia, and he slept. And Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh took one of Earthling's sides and closed it up with flesh where it had been.
Okay, so let me just comment on that, and Asher Chaim knows this as well. So historically, this has been translated as rib, but a convincing analysis of the word Selah by looking at other places in the Torah, including where it's used by the sanctuary, the Mishkan, shows us that Selah actually means side. So what the Midrash does with this, it says, Adam, the first Adam, was neither male or female, right? It was neither male or female, but was split into two. The original Adam was a hermaphrodite, was split into two, and then that's how we got male and female. So this translation kind of echoes that understanding. Okay, go on.
ויבן אדוני אלוהים את הסלע אשר לקח מן האדם לאישה, ויביאה אל האדם. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the God, constructed that side, which had been taken from Earthling, into a woman, and brought her to the remaining portion of Earthling. Vayomer ha'adam, zot ha'pa'am, esem me'asamai ubasar mibasari, lezot yikare isha, ki me'ish luktaha zot. The remaining half of Earthling said, finally, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, this one shall be known as Isha, woman, for this one was taken from Ish, man. Al kain ya'azov Ish et aviv et immo v'davak be'ishto v'hayu levasar ehad. Therefore, a man leaves his father and his mother, clings to his woman, and they become a single entity.
So this is fascinating because they started off as a single entity, and then they were split, and then so there's unity, separation, differentiation, and then reconnection.
May I throw in something?
Yeah.
That when Earthling says finally, it's because in between there's the story of creation of animal companions.
Right.
And animal companions are fantastic, but not enough for that Earthling.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Adam does not see Adam's self mirrored until Adam meets one. Then there's a match, right? Adam recognizes that it's a match. Right? This is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. Okay, great. All right, I'm going to do a few more things and then I'll call people. I kind of want to get to the overall point and I'm going to open things up. So what's fascinating here is that they start off, Adam and Chava, not ashamed, right? There's another verse that I left out. It got lost. Okay, so before this passage, oh no, there it is. So the Adam and Chava, the two of them were naked, the human and the human's wife, but they felt no shame. And there's a word play here with the next sentence, that the serpent was the shrewdest. So nude and shrewd rhyme in the Hebrew, and also in the Everett Fox translation, which I couldn't for some reason include here. So there's something that happens with the duplicity or the deception of the snake and the human being's nudity. Like that's sort of, there's some kind of strange interaction between those two things in this story. So the Nachash was more shrewd than any animal of the field that God made. And here you see both names of God, Yud He Vav He and Elohim, right? And those two names of God come together at times in the second creation story. And the snake says to the woman, Vayomer el Isha, Af ki amar Elohim, lo tochlu mikol eitz hagan. So the snake says to the woman, did God say that you shouldn't eat from any of the trees of the garden? So the snake starts to introduce doubt into God's words. We can eat from any tree of the garden, and from the tree that is in the middle of the garden. Amar Elohim lo tochlu, and God said, do not eat.
Is there a tradition as to why there's this booby trap in the middle of the garden?
Yeah, there's a booby trap.
Okay.
Right. It is only about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden that God said you shall not eat of it or touch lest you die. So Tamaz is bringing up, why is there this incredible booby trap? It's like saying to a kid, you can play with all these toys in the whole room, but there's that one toy in the middle of the room, don't touch that.
It becomes very interesting.
It's a complete setup. Right. So what is this story about, given that? Is this God who wants to set up human beings to fail? Is that what it's about? Or perhaps it's a story that human beings tell about the essence or the nature of human beings to explain mortality and how difficult life is, and how difficult birth is, and shame and blame. Like, what happened to our original unity? What happened to that, overwhelming feeling of connection? We lost it, right? Human beings grown up both in terms of, from childhood, from that time of the world is off built to sort of disconnecting from that. And also, through time, through history, more alienation, more disconnection, more destruction, more exploitation. So this story explains so much. Okay, so I'm just trying to figure out what to do here. Okay, so we kind of know the story. I think people know the story. This is a iconic story in Western civilization. Basically, the woman takes the lead, or the snake instigates her, and the woman takes the lead, and she eats. And what's interesting here is the man is sitting next to her, right? She also gave some to her husband, and he ate. But it says in the Hebrew, she also gave it to her husband who was with her. So he's kind of standing there. And I know, and she eats because it's good, because it looks good, and it's a desire to the eyes, and she wants to become nechmana es lahaskil. She wants to become illuminated. All these, I think, great reasons. Why does the man eat it? Because she gave him some.
Yeah.
And what happened? So what's the force of eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil? What did they understand? What do they know? They knew they were naked. Self-consciousness. Like the first division, one could say, from the self. Right? When you're a 2-year-old or 3-year-old, you're running around naked. You don't even think about it. And then suddenly you're 5, maybe 4, I don't know. And it's like you start hiding yourself. Right? You start wanting the barrier between yourself and the world called clothes. Okay. Right. They do keep him, and then they made themselves these little fig leaf skirts. And then there's another division. What's the other division? They hear God. So they hear the voice of God, and the voice of God is walking around the garden. What an interesting and such a, immediate manifestation of who God is for them at that point in time, right? Really down on earth with them. And what do? They hide. So the first division is from themselves and their own bodies. And the second division is they hide from God. And God says, where are you? Like, what happened? Like, what's going on here? And the human being, the Adam, says, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid, I was scared. Why? Because I am naked. And I hid. Right, so one could say this is all about the shame of one's body, or maybe just exposure and vulnerability. And there's so much, God bless you, there's so much going on here. And then God says, who told you you were naked? Right? So from that tree that I told you not to eat from it, did you eat? And what does Adam say? Vayomer Adam, Asher natata imadi. The woman that you gave to be with me, she gave it to me. And that's why I ate. So shame has been born and blame has been born, right? Such fundamental human impulses, right? Shame and blame. Ouch. Asit, and God says to the woman, what did you do? And what does the woman say? The Tomer Isha, and the woman says, Hanachash hasi'eni v'ochel. The serpent duped me and I ate. So she blames it on the snake, and he blames it on the woman. And then we have punishment, which includes how hard labor is, both in terms of pregnancy and working the land, and also power relationships, because God told Adam that Adam would have dominion over women. So all kinds of wounds, right? All kinds of alienation. And to go back to Alana's point, how might the first story of creation be a healing for that? So I would say two things. What happens when we move from our own sense of shame and blame, or maybe self-loathing, and we remember that we're created in the image of God? And what happens when we get so involved with the drama of the day, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later in services, and we remember, oh, I'm not the whole map. Rabbi Sharon and I have been talking a lot about, the map of our lives. And sometimes certain dramas kind of, sort of inhabit and fill up that whole map, and there's nothing left, right? And then you remember, oh, there are other parts of life. Right? There are other parts of life. It's like, okay, this person really doesn't like me, and I'm kind of obsessed with that, but I'm beloved, all these other places. Or, this part of my life isn't going well, but there's a whole universe out there, and I forget about the grandeur of the world, right? What does it take to remember that? So that was my notion about how the first creation story is the remedy or the healing that was created before the wound of the second creation story. So here I spoke. Now I want to hear from Melody in the time that we have left.
Can you say that again?
Yeah.
What do you mean about the first creation story? And maybe it's because I was late. So.
Yeah, it's okay. We cover that in the beginning. So the first creation story is Genesis 1. There are two creation stories, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. The other one is like the majestic story, like, there's no narrative. It's like,
I read it. So how is that healing?
So what I'm saying is it's healing in two ways. One is there's a count of human beings created in divine image. And when we remember that, we might move from self-hatred to remembering that we are reflections or mirrors for something beautiful and majestic and unified. And in the second way is it's like human beings have a very little piece in that tale of the creation of the universe, to remember that we're not the whole story. Right? That we're small and the universe is big. And as Alana said, we decenter ourselves. It allows us to decenter. Human beings in a way, one could say, well, you could make a different argument about creation one, are in a sense decentered. Okay, so I see hands, and we will start in the room.
So I'll be very brief because there's a lot to say here.
Yeah.
Does anybody notice what a bad start God has gotten off to in this story? I mean, he creates this wonderful creation and loses control of it almost immediately. I think this
in creation too.
Yeah,
not in creation one.
Right, but
right.
He's this.
Yeah, God's not doing well here.
This notion that God is all powerful is thrown out very quickly. And our next story, Noah, he's going to talk about what a mistake he's made creating these people.
Yes.
So this notion that God is infallible, we can put that aside too.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the story can continue.
Yeah. Now, God in the Torah is like a troubled and struggling figure, character. And in fact, I'm going to be teaching a course in Beit Midrash, Reckoning with God. So really sort of trying to understand, like, what is God's personality? It's going to start on November 2nd, I think, Wednesday nights. What is God struggling with here? Right? And I think this also goes back to Madeleine's point. If you create a human being or creature that is free and you don't have control of, you're in trouble. It's kind of like having children. You're in trouble from the moment you've gotten. Let me go to some comments here, and then I'll come back to you, Jen. Okay. So we have Jay, Lori, Mark, and we only have 5 minutes, and I really need to run to services. So please, everybody, brief.
Regarding your prime directive, how are these different? Notwithstanding the lack of the greater detail and the lack of centrality in the second, in the first versus the second, and more detail in the second, my main puzzlement has, I don't think, been addressed at all, which is why does the second story totally negate the pshat of Zachar or Nekava? Why do they have to suddenly create, something that has already been created? And how is the first a remedy for that puzzlement for me in the second?
Why in the second story is God creating human beings if they've already been created?
No, specifically Zachar and Nekava. That's in the pshat of the first. And suddenly it's as if that wasn't there. God, Adam was alone. Adam, even if he was...
the second story does not know about the first story. The second story is not conscious of the first story. When you read it, right, you're reading two stories as if they're connected, but they're not necessarily connected.
So in terms of your hypothesis then, how is the second story a remedy for the fact that we already had Zachar and Nekava in the first? Oh, I'm sorry, right. Or, so I don't know,
You're saying the first story is a remedy for
the first story is a remedy for the second. The only thing I would say there is that it's very clear in the first story that both Zachar and Nekeva are created in the image of God, and they're created at the same time. Each of them have primacy. It's not like one follows the other one.
Okay, so I guess what's puzzling to me is if the second doesn't know about the first, why is the second assuming that there isn't already in part of God's image a Zachar and Nekava? Maybe we should ask it that way.
It's a great question. I don't think I can address it right now. I'm going to think about it.
Okay.
But it's a great question. So what's going on? I think what's going on is we're sort of being set up for the power dynamics of the punishment. Possibly. That's my first thought.
So I'm going to try to keep it simple and sweet and to the point.
Brief as possible, Lori, please. We've got 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Right. So for those of us like David, for those of us who spend our lives being in therapy with people, we know that the therapy process is going through shame and blame back to self-love and self-connection. And yet the corporeal place of, can I share my darkness with another person because we talk directly to God because it's very private. So then we strip down and there's a unification of Yud-He Vav-He, Elohim, with the corporeal world. And it's almost how God comes between us, so we become vessels for healing each other in this journey of return.
Beautiful.
From
Beautiful.
multiplicity.
Yeah, and that really echoes Buber's notion of I thou, and how God resides between us.
Exactly. And that the
But
and
Lori, I'm
that-
gonna move on. I'm sorry. Beautiful. Mark. Daniel, I don't call on people twice. I'm sorry. Mark?
I actually think the Greeks had it right.
Greeks, great.
The Greeks, that is, they didn't try to pretend that the gods were perfect. Here we are trying to posit that, God is perfect, except, we're made in the divine image and we mess up. God made us, God messes up. And
Nice.
God should, Adam should have said, not said, hey, the woman made me do it. It's, hey, you made us like this, right? We're like you. So
it's your fault.
It's your fault, really. And I think that's and we are trying to, really take it all upon ourselves.
Yeah.
And the reality is we have a very messed up God and a very messed up relationship with that.
Yeah, and the figure of God biblically, for the most part, there's some images of shlemut and perfection, but God in the Bible is not perfect at all. God regrets, God gets angry, God's disappointed, like Bacha, God's disappointed, right? So God seems to, as much of a reflection of us as we are a reflection of
it. So to actually, pretend this is to actually really take on blame for ourselves that I think isn't healthy.
Yeah, and that really comes from medieval philosophers with the idea of God being, so perfect and unreachable. Okay, Sharon, Jen, and then we're gonna have to close with a little blessing.
Thank you so much. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
I'm just really struck by the duality, the dual healing power of the first story that you're describing, which is, it's like the two pockets, but the dual nature of it is that it speaks to both our majesty as created B'Tselem Elohim and to our smallness as part of a much larger picture. And it just strikes me, it's really the antidote to who said, forgive my language, but I'm the piece of shit around which the universe revolves, right? So it's the antidote.
Both piece of that, absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that, the dual nature of the healing. So being created in the image of the divine, and even if the divine is imperfect, but at least that's fundamentally like of value, right? There's no negating, if we think about ourselves creating the image of God, there's no negating our value, right? There's no challenging that value. And then there's the decentering, like the world does not revolve around me. And that's also potentially healing, as someone said, in terms of the earth, right? We're not, we are not, even though, I think the tension here and the flaw in my argument is that in Genesis 1, it says that we are here to dominate, the rest of the creatures. So that's a problem. In that way, it's not healing. But if we keep those two other elements in mind, it can be profoundly and powerfully healing, and to shift who we are in the narrative of the unfolding of human beings and this earth. That seems to me what's required for any healing environmentally in terms of the earth to begin. Okay, Jen.
So it seems to me
A little louder just because,
that this book